Hello.
Howdy.
Danny should be joining us.
Okay.
Okay, I'll wait to start the recording. Another minute or so. How are you all?
Pretty good.
Doing pretty well. It's nice weather here.
Good.
It's been a bit of a roller coaster, but good. Hey, Danny.
Sorry, I didn't respond to your text. I didn't see it until now. But yes, this is the regular meeting room.
I figured it out.
So, I don't know if we've totally finished chapter 1 or not last time. I think we were on the cusp of it. But, yeah, I don't know where you want to begin with that, Amanda.
We can
Wait a second.
we can finish chapter 1. I wrote down a note. Like it seemed, I hope you can hear the noise outside my window. Did you start the recording?
I'm gonna do that, and then I'll just start sharing my screen and try to do like the full screen thing again.
Okay, that sounds good.
I only have one computer today, so it might be a little bit different, but we should. Job done. Oh, okay, yeah. Okay. Got to begin this thing. Once this comes back.
Live streaming is on.
It sure is.
When the live streaming is recording this, does it capture its own voice? Does the recording begin with?
No, honestly, I think it used to, and I think it's gotten a little bit better about trimming the beginning and end of things, give it a little bit of stuff. I'm a little concerned because I don't see it. Okay, all right, there we go. All right, okay, it's appearing. And now, yeah, all right, cool. So I have the text here. I tried to put some things on Jamboard, but it was really frustrating using this computer for some reason, so I'm kind of gonna just let that be. But I think you can see the notes and everything, right? On the
Yes.
screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's back over here. There. All right, so we're gonna finish up chapter 1 previously. Just to kind of review of last week. That's funny. It's not showing me. Okay, there it is. All right, come on. We kind of had this trajectory going to the first one. We talked about lenses and things. This is like it's kind of from the first meeting. I don't know if it's a review from the first meeting, whatever. But we kind of had these notes from the end of chapter 1, apparently, and the beginning of chapter 2. We're kind of approaching the talk about like what kind of devil is our scientific understanding and stuff like that. I think this is in chapter 2, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is chapter 2, specifically the vitalism and souls discussion, which we'll get more into. we had a discussion about aliveness and diva worm. A lot of we wanted him to explain more of the name drops.
Oh yeah, I didn't follow up on a single one of those. I meant to report back with my findings, but maybe next week.
I shared my extremely awesome picture of this Norbert Wiener quote,
Oh yeah.
which I think is from the original cybernetics. He kind of gets really close to saying some adjacent things in the reading for today, but I think it's not from this book. I think it's from the original. The purpose of cybernetics, which is from page 17. I guess it would be nice to recall that, is to develop a language and technique that will enable us to indeed attack the problem of controlled communication in general, but also to find the proper repertory of ideas and techniques to classify their particular manifestation under certain concepts. So it's more vague when I read it again this time. If we had a discussion about the motor control and how explicit the good regulator theorem needs to be. We had a Maxim Roginski, and Bradley kind of mentioned, the shutdown of these control theoretic metaphors by philosophers until they figure out what the hell's going on by reading post-1960 control theory literature. And that was sort of a interesting point that came up last time. And I think that was I had this extended brick analogy about affordances and using bricks at the end of the last week. We wondered a bit about like Shimero versus how to Bradley offered the question, how do affordances and control relate? And we mentioned, okay, what about Shimero and synergies? I got emotional about notion apparently. So yeah, that's kind of the rapid recap. And I'm assuming we're kind of like at the very edge of this chapter, if not finished it. I don't remember exactly where we left off, but
I don't remember where we left off like in the book, but I do remember one like open question that we left off on was kind of like this: what is life, and how much does the category matter for Weiner? Because it didn't seem like it mattered that much. And then that's when you preview chapter 2, and then he makes it more explicit that like he wants to stay away from talk about the soul and vitalism. But even after looking at chapter 2, it kind of seems like the distinction between living and non-living matters for even if machines and organisms are both just these entropy reducers. It seems like distinguishing the two like matters. And that was saying, and yes, I wrote it in that note. So one reason why distinguishing between living and non-living things seems to matter is, so he says that feedback doesn't like guarantee stability. There are entropic tendencies at that higher level too. But what do you say? Its own entropic tendencies, if that's checked by still other controlling mechanisms and kept within limits, then there won't be then entropy will not win. And then my first thought was, well, that kind of sounds like a infinite regress. Like if each level of controlling mechanisms needs to also be controlled, or else entropy will win, then where does that stop? And maybe one answer is, in a living thing, that stops in virtue of something to do with self-organization. I don't know the details, but that does seem like a difference between machine and life, is the ability to maintain itself. So even if machines have these feedback mechanisms, if that doesn't guarantee like stability, then there's a distinction, and that's like in his own terms talking about entropy. So I don't know how much that'll matter, but
Well, yeah, I think that's. So I guess all right. So let's diagram this a little bit. So if you have so organism always has entropic tendencies, or a machine, I guess, as well. And the entropic tendency is to sort of degrade or produce waste, heat, energy, whatever. Or I'm doing this talk on information and entropy, and I've got a bunch of slides. I'm not going to show it today, but just to warn you. So you have this thing that's exhibiting entropy and moving towards entropy. And so to counter that, you would maybe add on some new thing like that would counter that entropy. And then, of course, that system then will fall into entropy. So you add another thing. And then eventually you're saying that's an infinite regress, which is probably true because you could just have infinite feedback loops that would help counter that. And then, yeah, and I guess, yeah, the ability to build a feedback loop for that purpose is the difference between life and a machine, is a machine can't really construct its own feedback loops in that way. And what I'm thinking of is like biochemistry and biochemical reactions and sort of synthesizing different like feedback loops within a cell. And I don't have an example handy, but I can see where you're going with that.
Maybe this distinction doesn't matter, not because like maybe, I mean, even for organisms, entropy does end up winning. So maybe that's not actually a significant difference between machine, and you can also build machines that do some amount of self-maintenance. So maybe it's a difference in degree and not in kind.
Yeah, but I mean, like, yeah, because certainly you could build a computer that can fix or can update itself.
Mm-hmm.
But also that living things die and they succumb to entropy. It's
Right.
not, but they can extend their lifespan or they can extend their dynamic range. So yeah, it is. I mean, we can spend the next 2 years debating what is life, and then like using that definition and poking holes in it because that's the nature of the question. But I would say, yeah, it's definitely like machines can do that, and sometimes we can build machines that are somewhat lifelike in that direction. And maybe it's confusing to people why we don't call it life, but no, I think kind of like a set of biochemical pathways, especially those that like introduce things like redundancy into the system, like something they call feudal cycles, which are these cycles that they'll expend energy, but they won't produce a product. And so, they do this for reasons that aren't really clear, but there are a number of reasons why you might think they would do it. One would be that it's a sort of redundant cycle that could then be leveraged for other things. Another, maybe just simply to produce heat energy. There are a number of reasons why something like that. I mean, maybe you don't even need to have a reason for something. It's just there and doing its thing, and it may get co-opted for a function it might not. But the living system has this slack that it can use. So if you have a feudal cycle going and it's doing nothing but creating entropy, it might get hooked into something later, or as a consequence of maybe adaptation that build complexity in the organism or the cell. So I mean, like this is the kind of thing that when people study or when people design bio-inspired systems or biologically inspired engineering systems, that's the kind of thing they try to mimic from living systems. So that's what people, when they say lifelike, that's what they mean. They're trying to sort of take those kind of principles and apply them to engineered systems. And whether those are actually make them living systems is, again, like a 2-year debate. But
Yeah, that's pretty much where chapter 2 goes. Like he dives there's sort of, I don't know if you really want to say anything about this sort of demon analogy with Maxwell's demons and the two doors and the train and stuff like that. But I'm kind of just, how does he get into that? Progress and Entropy is the title of the chapter. So he kind of goes right into Maxwell's demon stuff and sort of basically what Bradley said, and like sort of the tendencies to do that and stuff like that. I don't know if anybody's questions with that, we can do that. But then I kind of got to Norbert kind of gets to the same point of, what I think the quotes might be in here, but yeah, it's on this next page, both Stereo 32, the vitalism soul stuff, and in this sort of what do we do with this? And I think kind of what he comes out with is he tries to make it very clear that when he's comparing organisms to the machine, he means they both exert like local anti-entropic processes, which I think is like, it makes sense for what he wants to do. He talks then about like, let's be en rapport with the outer world with sense organs. He kind of gets real close to saying Bradenburg vehicles, but he doesn't say Bradenburg vehicles here, which is kind of interesting.
Where is this?
Like on page 30, 33, 34, he's talking about like, I'll go back to this over here. So he kind of gets, it's easy to make simple machines that will run towards the light or run away from it. If such a machine contains light, which one is this? They need these sort of like basic sense organs or,
Yeah, so they were doing this stuff in cybernetics. So like Bradenburg didn't come up with that on his own. Like,
yeah,
like they were, I think we talked about Gray Walter's machines. Like, that Wiener actually built his own robots that he would test out, and they did a lot of these. Ashby, of course, made what they called the homeostat. So it's like, you're getting these very simple inputs, and the machine is behaving and it's regulating its behavior. So there are a lot of little robots that people were building like that. Claude Shannon built some little robots. Theseus, it's a little mouse that would go through a maze, and they, so these automatons that they build and run through a system, very simple systems. And then Bradenburg kind of took inspiration from that for his vehicles. And his vehicles actually were a thought experiment. They weren't even like a real thing.
mm-hmm.
But they had these, you'd have like simple signals coming in, and then it would do things. So that's interesting. But one of the things that Bradenburg did, and I remember I was going to mention this last night, I did not, because I didn't exactly know where to fit it into the meeting. But we were talking about like emotional valences and some of these regulated behaviors. And if you read Bradenburg's book on vehicles, he kind of uses this kind of idea of these little systems that, you have an input and you have some behavior that emerges. He actually thought of them as sort of like emotions or emotional states.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's like, they're pretty complex emotional states for just this little bit of wiring. So like some of the vehicles would, exhibit love, which is just like an affinity for something, which, you can debate whether that's really love, but like, there's this idea that it's like generating this sort of emotional state. And, it's kind of emerges from this sort of system where you're adding in components and configuring them in different ways. And, it doesn't really require anything really, special. I guess that's kind of what they're getting here too, because they talk about like, the nervous system, and they talk about biological systems, and then they're kind of talking about these kind of, emerging things that emerge that are sort of fighting entropy and can build complexity and things like that. So
Yeah, and like love was basically wiring thing, if I remember correctly, where it would approach, in a photo taxi sense, it would approach the light somewhat. It would like move towards the light with potentially gusto, but then as it approached light, it would slow down, and then like the beam of light, like a flashlight on the ground, it would slow down and then kind of walk very carefully next to it. I think that was the example of well, not example of love, but more the the emotion that was kind of associated with that movement. And yes, there was something last night too that you reminded me about. There was something I'm not going to pull it right now because I crash everything. But was it the gesture awareness, or was it no? It was Evan Thompson's thing about like his take on Verilla's work and where they're going with that. I think, and that he was commenting on the valence and the emotive state of it. The thing that I actually kind of associated with the Avery's work as well. And there was a talk about like not only movement, like some parallels between like physical movement and also like mental movement. There was some line in it that was specifically saying something like movement in this attractive valence sense about identity is perhaps similar to like physical movement and like moving about that space, which was interesting. That's something I definitely want to follow up on there, and I wish I could reference it better than that. I don't know. Yeah, interesting stuff.
I've mentioned this paper before, or maybe it wasn't the paper that talked about the phenomenology of dance, but I read it, Danny and I both read it at the same time as that paper, and it was talking about how thought is inherently like kinetic. It was kind of like an embodied thought is like kind of like saying thought is embodied, but then part of embodiment is like motion through space. And so it was like thought is motion. So exactly this like inner world movement. And I forget the details, but yeah, I've encountered that idea before. I forget if it was supposed to be like a consequence of embodiment or what, but it was like kinetic was the word that they used.
Yeah, there's something definitely between this and sort of like concepts of quote unquote information metabolism, and also like regarding the gesture of awareness. Maybe that's an interesting way to think about that in terms of the gesture of awareness completed has a kind of lessening some of the like I don't know if I can make this fit in like some of the Maxwell's Zeman analogy, but like you're kind of putting less like if someone's if this is I don't know, I think about playground analogies here. Like if someone's on a swing and they're swinging, but you're pushing them on the swing, it's a bit like you're not pushing them on the swing anymore, and eventually they can sort of rest. Or those like things that spin around in the circle with like I don't know, the kids hang on and someone spins and they go fast and they slide off or whatever. I don't know, but like there's some sort of completing the gesture and this relation. But that's kind of going back to the other books that we went to another time. I like how kind of Norbert delicately. This is like a super great Greek line. Thus, the nervous system and the automatic machine are finally alike. Or what did he say here? There's another one where he talked about nervous system. And then he kind of gets into this interesting discussion about kind of explaining neural networks in biological and semi-biological senses, which is interesting. It talks about synapses and it gets into like policies as well of behaviors and which is kind of an interesting version of that. It mentions Walter and Ashby explicitly again here. And then let's look at, he makes this big transition to this devil talk. We've got demons and now we're at these devils, but it's like the machine, like a living organism, as I have said, is a device which locally interprets entropy, device to be able to make decisions that can produce around it a local zone of organization in a world whose tendencies run down. This science, and then he kind of goes into this I don't know, kind of a manifesto of like what the scientist's work is, and he juxtaposes it to the problems at hand. And this is kind of, I know we kind of touched up upon this last time a little bit, and I'm not really sure. There's a lot of different what directions this part could probably go in. I thought it was a really interesting way of talking about it because he goes about basically, is nature actively trying to undermine our understandings? Is it really shifty and shady, like someone bluffing at poker, or not? Or is it just, he kind of concludes with this, like the Einstein quote, like the Lord is subtle, but it doesn't simply mean in that it's not actively during this sort of reshuffling its plans that is nature. So I'm curious what people thought about that, or if it was just like, or willy-nilly, or what they want to take away from that, I suppose.
Did you just call it devil talk?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Norbert, what does Norbert do? He gets all this stuff and he starts talking about demons, and he talks about devils. He talks about I think it's, what is it? Manichean?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Versus Augustinian, and he's saying Augustinian devils, like, I think he said, yeah, compared to the Manichean devil of being refined in malice, and being very, having cunning, I think might be a good way to say it, or if he says it somewhere. The Augustinian devil is stupid, he plays a difficult game, but it may be defeated by our intelligence as thoroughly as by a sprinkle of holy water. In that once we figured the game out, the game doesn't change, basically. Bluffing and Mephistopheles and Faust appear.
I thought that was maybe, I don't know, this was a kind of goofy discussion because I was like, what is this view that you're like, is he responding to some view of nature where there's this, where it's like acting against us? That just seemed like I wasn't sure if that was supposed to be a stand-in for some kind of philosophy of science or something, because it seemed like once I understood what he meant, it seemed obvious to me that like yes, like increasing disorder and entropy, that's what happens passively. There's not like, it's not the result of some force, let alone some anthropomorphized thing that has something resembling like agency or decision making. I don't know.
I was real curious, like, because seeing this again, this part feels so distinct, and I wonder if there were changes in the first or second edition of here. As we go from this big talk about demons and entropy, and then sort of brain for vehicle stuff, and the nervous system, and then it's sort of like, boom. I feel like, I don't know if it's supposed to be like a separate heading or something, but it's just straight into what you talk about Walter and Ashby, and then what is this like, what kind of problem are we trying to solve? What's the nature of the problem here? Sure, is it what kind of devil is it? And then like, where does it go with it? I guess it's kind of his setup for kind of talking about the role of science And I know that's a big thing for him. Like one of my quotes I remember from somewhere, another book was sort of like, being a scholar isn't something from his dad, because dad was a very, very serious like literature guy who kind of like tried to push him into being this prodigy. And it's like scholarship isn't just a job. It's like a vocation and a calling. You have to treat it very sacredly or something like that. And I think he's kind of going into, scientists have to approach this enemy in a certain way, and the way to win here is different than winning at chess, because it's about your best moments versus like minimizing your least and stuff like that. And it's sort of this. I think he's setting up this conversation about like what are we supposed to do in society. I don't know if this is just this sentence. I don't know, just the way it's kind of blurred or whatever, or spaced in the text, but I didn't quite get it. We are immersed in a life which the world as a whole obeys the fusion increases.
No, something was cut off.
Yeah, I think there's some magical.
Obeys the second law of thermodynamics, probably, where something, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the answer to everything. Had to be redacted. So his enclaves, the meaning of local temperate islands, yes. And then it kind of goes. I think this is kind of where we're getting to what you wrote down here. It's kind of like I don't really know what to. I think this is kind of getting to. I guess the title of the chapter. I guess all this is kind of set up to get to that. But like, where are we relative to like this enlightenment project of, it's enlightened brought up this idea of progress, but then he brings about all these other things that were like critiquing it, or taking in different directions, I guess, with Malthus and everybody else. So I'm curious what the philosophy people want to say about all this. He gets to Darwin eventually. This is the one thing I put him in.
He's kind of hinting at this idea that, like, we talk about the second law, but it's really, the model of the second law is based on a closed system. That is, you close a system, you have a fixed amount of energy, you let the system run, energy decreases, entropy increases, eventually it dies. But it doesn't really consider what happens if you keep putting energy into it. You put energy into it, you get these dead zones, I guess, or areas where entropy, I guess, accumulates or whatever. But then you can get new energy coming in, and it can build structure. And so there's a lot of, like, people, I guess, have thought about this. But I find it interesting. He talks about this in terms of the sort of decision making allows you to allows the system to localize entropy. So, like, you might have like a open system where, like an organism, you need to like build a boundary around yourself to protect yourself from the environment, to have little subsystems running. But, you also want to have it be somewhat open so you can get new energy coming in. And sometimes there are parts of the organism where, you might want to have a entropy sink. Like, for example, you might want to dispose of waste, or you might want to have things that die off and then build a new system to replace it. So, like, our cells die all the time. We emit waste in different ways. We have all of that in our organism. Our organism does that. And so we're an open system that's subject to entropy, and we eventually die, but we don't die like within maybe 30 days, because if you were to like say like someone's large intestine were obstructed, they could die pretty quickly from sepsis because the entropy or the waste builds up and they can't get rid of it. Or you might have a problem where you can't get energy, and so you similarly have a problem with staying alive. And so you see this in some organisms. And so, this is kind of, I think where he's going with this is that it's, the second law is sort of this thing that is set up in a closed system. It describes a closed system. When we talk about a daemon, we want to talk about, like, how does the system fight entropy? Well, one of the short answers is that if you are partially an open system, you can fight entropy. If you compartmentalize your system, you can fight entropy, or at least you have a place for entropy to run to instead of being like uniform. And so there are a lot of ways you can, that entropy gets kind of shifted around and the accounting becomes less problematic, and you have these, I guess, demons, but they're really not demons or something that, I don't know what you want to call it, but and then I guess he gets into this stuff with actually, when he was talking about the Menachian demon, he talked about the theory of games by von Neumann and Morgenstern, which is, if you're interested in game theory, that's like the beginning book for that. And, basically that's the, the study of strategic operations. So, people have applied game theory to things that aren't like, humans. You can apply it to behavior, but you can also apply it to biological systems and even physical systems. And I think that's where he's going with that you can apply it to these energetic systems. And there's some connection there between strategies and information and building this complexity that he doesn't specify here. But I don't think anyone specified, but is really interesting.
That's related to another question that I still have, remaining from the preface. So he sets up the like life or machines or like our world as local enclaves of decreasing entropy within the actually closed system of the universe. But then a few times he's said things like, let me find the quote. Basically about how with cheap, like disordered energy, you can get information and you can get related to von Forester's order from noise principle. But let me find Weiner's articulation of it. An enormous, so page 39, an enormous local decrease in entropy may be associated with quite a moderate energy transfer. This is one of the fundamental facts of biology. So just with a little bit of energy, you can get a relatively large decrease in entropy. So if that's the case, why are these things that are like locally decreasing entropy supposed to be seen as the like exception if they come so cheap, if they come with just like a little bit of energy? Not ordered energy, doesn't have to come from order, but it can come from disorder, is my understanding.
I'm not sure.
Like even if the whole universe is a closed system and overall entropy has to be increasing, does it follow that conceptualizing life as anomalous or something? Like, does that have to be the case?
Well, he's talking, but he's putting information in here too, though.
Mm-hmm.
Because so that's something. I told you that I was working on that talk, and it's kind of hard. Like, there's some really like good examples of like how people have done this, and it's kind of interesting because like the equations are similar, and you can actually make like logical statements to say information and energy are linked by these two parameters. and you can change them and get certain results. And sometimes, we gain information from, an expenditure of entropy from the work that I've seen on this. And I go through a few examples in the talk. There is this like connection between you expend some energy to gain information, and then you use that information to maybe circumvent entropy, or sometimes you expend a lot of entropy to gain some information. There's this relationship there that's really hard to really game out. I mean, I've seen a couple of examples. So there's Landauer's principle, which when I give this talk, I'll talk about it. It's basically, how much energy do you need to erase a bit of information? So it takes at a certain temperature, it takes a certain amount of energy to do that. And then, you say, okay, well, if I can erase or manipulate bits, then I can build a system where I can put, information into place, but it comes at a cost of entropy. And what basically is happening is, to me at least, it seems like a shell game, or almost like an accounting shell game, where you say, I'm going to create some information, I'm going to spend some entropy, and then it's going to create more entropy, or I'm going to transfer it to information. And there's this, and Landauer's principle is not the only thing that you might want to be concerned with. So it becomes this issue of, are you spending energy to create information? Is information actually working against entropy? So the more entropy there is, the more information there is, but that's because you're converting it from one currency to another. Sometimes, people talk about how information and entropy are separate, but, they kind of coexist. So it's really, it's a kind of a hard thing, I think, to get to. And I don't think anyone's figured out the rules or the laws that are, kind of hold true here. It's just kind of they can be slippery with information. They can be slippery kind of with entropy even. And then say how these two things are connected. So that's my take on it. I don't know.
No, that's interesting.
Thanks for adding Landauer's name. I didn't know that one.
Yeah.
There's a lot there. Before we go continue down that road or further in the book, I do want to. I thought this is kind of an interesting few paragraphs, and I wonder how much difference there is in the first edition of the book, because we have this statement about actually building an idea on purposeful random mechanism, but seeks for its own purpose through a learning process of learning, is not only one of the great philosophical contributions of the present, but will lead to highly useful technological development in the task of automation. And I mean, is that basically an allusion to reinforcement learning, basically, or I'm curious, kind of how he saw that play out some. Define, machines avoiding certain pitfalls over the breakdown, and he goes right into Darwin. Had a lot of influence. All philosophers drawing the scientific ideas at the time, and then briefly alludes to Marx and socialists, and kind of I'm just going to mention them here, and then that's it. So I'm curious how that. I'd be really curious if there was any difference between that and the first edition or not. And we kind of talked about 39 here, so.
That line about machines finding purpose in a sense, I highlighted that and added a question mark, prediction of machine learning.
Right.
There's another part where I think it was when Bratenberg vehicles came up, that one thing he said kind of sounded like, it also kind of sounded like a prediction of the type of machine learning where like they're finding a local minima of in some space. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. There's a lot. I always feel like for people that are super, not only like Norbert's, I feel weird about calling people like very smart or very intelligent, but I think Norbert, I would say beyond those sort of almost like traits, I would say Norbert had a very unique vantage point of someone who was kind of coerced into studying a lot of literature by his father, and then did a lot of mathematical weird stuff and was thrown into like the World War era, and saw post-war stuff, while being someone who was really literate in what came to be all these communications and ways of transmitting information stuff. And it's always weird to kind of, for me to think, and I don't want to make any. I'll reference the historical figure of Jesus, whether or not that person was able to see a lot of things in the future or not. But similar, like there's sort of this, what would someone explain? Like if Norbert was here today, I really wonder what would he say is like, yeah, that's basically what I was getting at, but I couldn't talk about it then because it didn't really exist, versus, oh, this is a surprise to me, or no, I think my language is better because it focuses on this as opposed to that. Like that kind of stuff is really interesting to me to think about, because he has to kind of talk in a way that he's sort of referencing people at the time socially referenced Darwin for social Darwinism and all those weird things that would come after it, and other ideas. I know that he's writing. I know some of his writing is like very carefully done in the sense of, I know that I have to speak in the moment that I'm in, versus there are things that will become manifest maybe at all in my lifetime. And I feel like that's a really fascinating. It's not maybe not a technical investigation for our breeding group, but like that to me is a fascinating, like, as someone trying to write things across like what's available now and what isn't available now. It's a really interesting thing for me to think about, and fits with a conversation we've had before about how what I just said, you kind of tried to identify as like, I don't know, we have to figure out a way, we have to figure out something to call this, Bradley. I don't know what it's going to be, but we periodically have, like every 2 weeks, we seem to mention that thing where only when certain people come together to kind of operate in some kind of an enclave of meaning that's temporary to work on a specific idea, and then the enclave goes away and the idea is touched, and then they come back to the meaning, and then the ideas progress in a different way, or the different actors and parts, and it goes away again. And it's like, I don't really know how to call that, but it's something we reference a lot, it seems.
Yeah, it's like an itinerant working group or a ephemeral thing. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know exactly what term to use. I think they're just different terms that I don't think anyone's really ever described it formally. Like,
Is the idea that there's like progress being made, but it's not like nonlinear, like you're maybe sometimes you like step forward, step back, but over time, like ideas are actually developed? Or is it more pessimistic and it's like, yeah, we have these groups that come in and out, and then each time they reemerge, it's like they're reinventing the wheel and then they fade out? Is it I guess it could be either.
Yeah, well, I think what Jesse's talking about is that if we have like a meeting and we keep, that's why I keep notes so that we have some continuity. We could come together, have a discussion, and then, lose a lot of content. So, you've lost work. But on the other hand, you can continue work with different people coming in, going, and it's just kind of like that's where you get that really nonlinear progress. And that's, I guess, more like the ephemera, like where you lose the ideas. The itinerancy is where you bring people together, and it's just kind of like moving forward, shambling forward, but it's not like the typical way we think of progress, which is where we all meet, and have our Macy meeting and like just keep going, continuing ideas. I think most ideas are like that though. Like they get like you just drive them forward and you say, "Here's a great idea," and then you throw it up, into the meeting, and people kind of debate it, and then it comes back out, and then you kind of maybe write a paper on it, and then it's like woefully out of date because it's time goes by and you learn new things. So there's a lot of that's an interesting. I don't know.
Well, it's not at all, as in a little bit, related to some things I'm trying to. It's not the frontier map preprint, but I think there's a line of things I want to do that are kind of about addressing that in a very lofty, reach goal way. But it's something. I think there's a way to bring some language to that. Honestly, I feel like the person I would talk to most about that to develop the language for it would be our friend Avery, who is very good at kind of tracting some of that. It's funny because I feel like I've never actually talked about this with Avery, but I think they would know what to say very easily. So maybe I'll try to just make a sticky note to bring that up with them.
So is progress an illusion?
I don't know, but I want to read this paragraph so bad. I don't know why it's just sticking out to me. In a very real sense, we're shipwreck packagers on a doomed planet. Yet even in a shipwreck, human decencies and human values do not necessarily vanish. And we must make the most of them. We shall go down. Let it be a matter we can look forward to worthy of our dignity. Honestly, I don't know. I really like Norbert's kind of tragic phrasing at times. You can relate to it in a way. But yeah, is progress an illusion? I don't know if I wouldn't actually focusing on that specific question right now.
Well, it's kind of a debatable thing in like evolutionary biology. I know that because the idea is that there's this old idea that evolution is about progress, and you see like the picture of the apes that are hunched over, walking on all fours, and then there's this progression to like bipedal humans, and you see that all the time. They call that the scala. They call that the scala natura, and the idea is that this is an old idea that evolution is progressive, that you go from this primal state to this advanced state. And if you actually, study evolution, you realize that that's actually not the case. It's actually much more, you can have all sorts of changes. It's not necessarily progressive in that way. That being said, there are like ideas of general trends in evolution. Like there's this idea of that there are more species over time, or that there's this increase in complexity over time. And Stephen Jay Gould had this idea of like a wall of complexity, where you start off at the beginning of life and you move through, phylogeny or the tree of life, and you get more complexity. So this is actually kind of an interesting case because there is this sort of idea. It's an old idea in evolution where there's progress, and more recently we've come to the conclusion that there's no progress. Or we talked about this in DevaWorm years ago. There are people like William Wimsatt who have tried to work out the ideas about like progress in evolution or progress in life. And, those are kind of, they're not mainstream ideas, but they're definitely people have this bias towards evolution being progressive. And we found through studying, life, the tree of life, putting it together, looking at different cases, that there isn't necessarily progress, that it's open-ended, that you can go from like one change to another, and there's no real progress there. It's just kind of like evolving according to what the environment dictates. And then, you know, there are other ideas that, well, maybe there's progress in the sense that there's more biodiversity, or there's organisms on the average tend to be more complex. So, you know, I didn't realize that at the time when you mentioned that about the groups, but that's kind of what you're talking about. You're talking about like the cultural evolution of progress, or progress in cultural evolution with groups and their progress and discussions. But you do have this problem in evolutionary biology of this, or I guess it isn't really a debate so much as it is a historical conflict, which is, you know, is evolution progressive or not? And most people would probably say no. Although you do have things like the Scala Natura, which are these depictions of progress that are wrong, but, you know.
And close.
I feel like there's a parallel in the philosophy of science with the way Thomas Kuhn talks about paradigm shifts, and I don't remember exactly how he uses the word progress, but basically the thesis is that we aren't moving towards truth. So in that sense, we're not like progressing towards truth in science. We're like, there are these paradigm shifts, but they're not really comparable to one another because they are different paradigms, and that's part of what part of what it means to be a paradigm is this like kind of isolation. So when you move from one paradigm to another, it doesn't make sense to say that you've moved like forward in a direction towards truth. It's more of like a jumping around. That's a very, very loose version of Thomas Kuhn, but
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that's kind of ties in with what Jesse was saying about the groups. Like, you know, you make progress when you have a debate. So, like in cybernetics, I guess is a good example. They had the Macy's conferences, and they made progress, maybe, but they actually didn't, because it's, if you look back at it, you're like, well, they definitely had a theme. Uh, but we don't necessarily, we didn't get anything out of that progress that they made. So is it progress? Maybe it was just like they just stuck on an idea and they kind of moved it forward, but it's, you know, in the larger scheme of things, it doesn't hold up. So it's not progress. Does that make any sense? I mean, okay.
Yeah, it's like movement, but it's not necessarily movement towards something that is better.
Right.
Yeah, and we're basically out of time, so I'll leave it at that. Well, there's one thing I'll say before I leave it be, because I always have to, you know. There's a little bit more to this chapter, and there's some things here that like I didn't quite. Well, I guess we're pretty close to the end of it, but there's a few more things here I'd be nice to kind of, I don't know, go over next time. Well, I don't know, but I guess what I'll say very briefly is, I think, and I don't know what Norbert would say about this yet. Maybe I just haven't gotten there. But the weird thing about progress is that, and kind of what I'm a little bit fascinated with right now, and some of the things related to frontier map. I don't know if you want to throw us in with that concept or not. Is that over time, like like there's more and more and more pockets, to use Norbert's language of islands or enclaves, over time, and as at least as far as population has grown in the way it has in the human project right now, there's just more and more pockets, and there's less. And maybe it's not really true. Maybe, I don't know if we can really categorize this. Like, is it more pockets of it because there's more people now, or is it just the same amount of fragmentation, just, you know, the same allocation, just with more volume? And it's like, I don't know. And I feel like progress, to kind of, the thing about progress to me is like, to what is the improvement, but also what would the measure of that even be? And I have my ideas, but I feel like there hasn't been a lot of coherent there's not been a lot of coherence about it. Maybe there's a big huge debate on whether it can be or not. But there's kind of more I want to say, but I think we're kind of up against it right now. So maybe we'll pick up. Maybe we'll say for next time, throw down your ideas of what progress should be, and we'll rapidly discuss that for like 5 minutes and then dive into the rest of the book. But I don't know. We'll see. I don't know. Closing thoughts from everyone before we head out. I guess we'll for next week we'll read the next chapter and kind of push forward.
Sounds good.
The as shipwrecked passengers on a doomed planet. We will end your book. Okay. Well, it's been fun, and I'll talk to you all next week. Thanks for being here.
See ya.
See you later. Bye. Thanks.